Conversations with leading experts in enterprise resource planning. Evolving ERP. Powered by Insight Jam.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Evolving ERP. It's great to have you back on Insight Jam's home for all things enterprise resource planning. My name is Ryan Daly, your host for today and every day on Evolving ERP. And as always, we have fantastic guest host, returning champion, as I like to say, Dan Aldridge. Dan, so great to have you back on the show. And for the first time, coming to us is Marcus Harris. Marcus, hello, and welcome to Evolving ERP.
Hey, Ryan, thanks for having me. Good to see you again, Dan.
Good to see you, Marcus.
Absolutely. Dan, I saw recently that you were featured on Gartner's Capterra article about ERP. Had a look at that with featuring yourself and some other brilliant minds in the space. So if you haven't had a chance, do check that out if you want a nice kind of overview of ERP. It was good for me at a more kind of basic level to get different pieces of the overall strategy. But here we're going to go into a little more depth. But before we do that, Marcus, since it is your first time on the show, could you let us know a little bit more about yourself? Let the people know where you're coming from, what brought you into ERP.
Yeah, I'm a technology and software attorney, and I'd say for the past 20 years or so, I've really focused my practice on drafting and negotiating technology-related contracts with a focus within that on large ERP acquisitions, so drafting and negotiating deals with Infor, SAP, Microsoft, Oracle, Epicor, you name it. I've really done it. Used to work in-house at SAP, used to work in-house at Infor. One of the other things I do is litigation, and we will, in addition to negotiating these types of contracts, we will litigate failed digital transformations and ERP implementations when they go sideways. And unfortunately, as you guys know, the failure rate of these things is incredibly high. And, while I would say the vast majority of those failures don't end up in litigation, a significant amount of them do, and it really does keep us busy.
Ooh, okay. So yeah, we haven't had anybody on the show coming from the legal side of things yet. So I'm fascinated as to your perspective on this and where this is going to go. So without any further ado, I will turn it over to you and let this conversation get heated up. And I'll see you in the back end, Dan and Marcus. Enjoy.
Thanks, Ryan. So Marcus, you're looking sharp as always. I love to see your podcasts, about the legal aspects of ERP and things like that, but they're always sharp. So
appreciate it. It was good to see you in Denver a couple of weeks ago as well. So.
Yeah, it was great. That was a good conference. Eric Kimberling's Third Stage Consulting Group conference was really nice, and I got a chance to see Jan Baan. So that was really great. Actually, it's, one of the questions that I have for you a little bit later is related to what Jan Baan is doing now, and kind of the legal aspects of it. Anyway, so let me kick right off. Always a lot of discussion about data.
Right.
So data, garbage in, garbage out. But my question to you from a legal standpoint is, who owns the data in a cloud ERP situation?
Yeah, I think that's a really nuanced question, but you're right. I mean, data is the lifeblood of ERP systems, and it's increasingly becoming the lifeblood of artificial intelligence solutions and just technology solutions in general. And so, solidifying your ownership interest in your data is going to be incredibly important. In the context of a cloud agreement, really, I would say it's unusual for vendors to try to secure an ownership interest in your data. It's an aggressive position, and it really depends on what you're able to negotiate. Some of them certainly would like to have an unfettered right to do whatever they can with your data, but it really comes down to what you negotiate, the terms and conditions. The way that we typically see it structured is that you will, as a customer, grant the ERP vendor or software vendor a license to access and use your data for the purposes of affecting the contract, right? So whatever services they're going to be providing to you, they're going to want a broad and expansive license to be able to use your data to do that. Increasingly, though, what we will see is a scenario where these vendors want to have a more expansive right and sometimes even an ownership interest in that data to be able to train their AI models and be able to do what they want to with your data without any interference or consequences down the line from you. So something that you've got to think about. They also, I would say, Dan, they want to have it both ways, and that they want to have an unfettered right to be able to do what they want to with your data, but they also want you to warrant and represent that you have all right, title, and interest to grant them that license or an ownership interest, and you will indemnify them if something goes wrong. So if that vendor is sued by a third party for using your data, they want you to be on the hook. And so that creates kind of an imbalanced situation. And that's why you've really got to look at these things with a jaundiced eye, think about the nuances, and make sure that you're protected.
Yeah, actually, you bled into my second question there about AI and the use of AI with the data. But just to follow up a little bit on the ownership question, do you see the ERP vendors with partial ownership or the right to restrict the data so that they make it difficult to get it out, right? So they might say, hey, you can SQL against the database, or maybe you have to use an API or something like that to get the data out. But we're going to make it really difficult for you to dump the whole database or expensive. Do you see that?
Yeah, that's a consistent theme in these agreements. And whenever you enter into one of these agreements, one of the things you've got to think about is, how do I get out, right? And part of getting out of the contract is extracting your data from that vendor and really having the ability to get it out at any time and doing what you need to do with that. But from a practical perspective, I think even if the vendor doesn't necessarily own your data, they've got control over it, and that's problematic. And so you've got to think about, well, how do I account for that reality? And they're going to make it difficult for you to transition to a different vendor by maintaining control over your data and making it difficult for you to get it out of that system. And so you need to think about that going in and negotiate the right contractual framework and language to be able to have the flexibility to do what you need to with your own data.
Okay, so yeah, I never really thought of that as a legal issue, but it is. That's interesting. That's very interesting. Yeah. So let me pull on the thread of the AI piece. The right to, is it a legal right, or is it something that's negotiated in contracts for them to be able to use your data or customers' data for training their AI models?
Well, certainly it's something that's negotiated. And I think, the trade-off of being able to utilize an artificial intelligence solution or AI functionality is that you've got to give up some control of the data that you're inputting into that system. And the way I conceptualize this is really into two buckets, and it's an input bucket and it's an output bucket. Okay. And you've got to think about, what information are you putting into that model? You don't want to put necessarily confidential information in there. You don't want to put proprietary information in there. And you certainly don't want to put trade secret information into that model. Now, the caveat with that being, what kind of model is that, right? Is it an open model? Is it a closed model? Is your data the only data that's going into that system? Then it becomes less of a concern as far as what you're putting in there, but only to the extent that you've got some assurances from that AI vendor that they're utilizing commercially reasonable measures to protect the data integrity, data security of the information that you put in there. I mean, you don't want to put, your crown jewels into there, or sensitive information, even confidential information, and then have no reps or warranties from that vendor that they're doing what they need to protect it adequately. I mean, that becomes a very problematic scenario. And so then I think, once you start thinking about the inputs, what you're putting in there, how important it is, and what steps the vendor is taking to protect it, you need to think about, let me take a step back. In addition to that, on the input side, you really want to think about, what happens to that input? Okay, what is the vendor doing with the input that you put into the model? And then you also want to think about, then make that transition out to the outputs, and who owns the outputs. So do you have an ability to utilize that output on a sole and exclusive basis, or is the output that has been generated, that is really the product of the inputs, your information, is that going to then be utilized by your competitors, by third parties, by people that you don't necessarily want to be utilizing it? And then the bigger question is, who owns it? Okay. I mean, I guess on the front end, you're thinking, well, I should, as the customer, have the right to own my own data, but who owns the actual output? And I would think
like Gen AI or something like that, right?
exactly right. And then if you want to have an ownership interest in it, you've got to negotiate that. But how do you protect it from an intellectual property perspective? I mean, these are all cutting edge issues that are being litigated in the courts now. The scope of protection afforded to the outputs, the information that's generated by the artificial intelligence functionality. And so, I think you need to look at these contracts carefully and think about all of these legal issues and really account for them on the front end, so that you don't have any surprises on the back end.
So I think it becomes a cybersecurity issue at some point, right? And also a competitive issue. If you, for example, if you have even something as simple as master data, right? I mean, you have customer list, you have a supplier list, you have supply chain information in POs, for example. If any of that gets out, that could be a detriment to a customer. So I would think that you layer in AI, and AI is, I guess it has they want to negotiate a contractual, ability to train their AI on your data, right? So that's part of the ownership, but I would think it just bleeds into some cybersecurity concerns and competitive analysis. I mean, what you're really trying to do is put in this ERP to give you and to build in functionality that gives you a competitive advantage. But you can, on the other end, if your AI is being, is making information available outside. Now, I don't know what the restrictions are. Like if you use, and I think it's even different for commercial AI, like Gen AI, like ChatGPT versus SAP Joule or Infor Gen AI or something like that. That's I guess within the four walls, but I would think that they would want to negotiate the right. I'm talking about the ERP vendors in this case, with their AI capability to train their AI using your data.
Yeah, absolutely. They want to be able to maintain ownership of that training, right? So the outputs of the training that they are doing on your data, they want to have an absolute unfettered ability to continue to do that, not have you with an ownership interest in it. And so that's almost kind of a separate issue apart from who owns the outputs, right? I mean, you've got to think about that. What can I do with the output of the artificial intelligence model? So I put my input in, I'm getting something out. Do I actually own it? That may not be real clear, but I think the vendors are going to make it incredibly clear as to, their utilization of your data to train the model. That, whatever that is, you want to call it intellectual property, data, information, proprietary information, they're going to want to have an ownership interest in that, which I think is generally fair.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, right? I mean, it depends on what the outputs are being used for, to your point, and also whether there's competitive information that creates a cybersecurity risk if it gets outside.
That's absolutely true. And I think you've got to have, as a customer that's utilizing artificial intelligence in really any context, you want to have some sort of a policy that dictates and governs what your employees can put into these things, right? As a law firm, we've got strict regulatory compliance issues. I mean, I can't necessarily put in, confidential attorney-client information into a Gen AI tool or AI tool and get some information out, because I don't know who has access to that information. And if I've just compromised the attorney-client privilege by putting my client's information into that tool. So there's a lot of things you've got to think about here. And then we talk about cybersecurity issues, and I think there's one thing that doesn't get a lot of press that really should. And then I want to circle back to another issue and how to mitigate the risk associated with all this stuff. And that's really data poisoning. I mean, if you're utilizing artificial intelligence to do some incredible things, maybe in the HR context, hiring, or even, supply chain, warehouse management, whatever it is, you get a bad actor in there, that disrupts the outputs that you're going to be using to run your business, that's a huge risk, right? I mean, you get a bad actor, and now they've jeopardized the data that you're relying on to run your company. That could be incredibly problematic. And who's got the liability associated with that? That's why you need to make sure that the vendor's got the right protocols and frameworks in place to protect not only the information that you're putting in there, but to ensure the accuracy and the integrity of the outputs that you might be relying on. And there's going to be, I'll guarantee you, in that contract, wide disclaimers, limitations of liability, mitigation of risk on the vendor side to prevent any kind of liability associated with any errors that arise in the context of data security, data poisoning, which is the other issue I want to talk about briefly. And you've got to make sure that you negotiate expanded liability caps for these things. And one of the things that vendors do now is really lock down that liability and their exposure, and with good reason. But as the customer, you've got to think about, well, if this all goes sideways and there is an issue, is it going to be enough for me to get the fees paid under this contract back as a limit of my liability, as a limit on my recovery? And the answer to that's probably no. So you want to make sure that you've either carved it out from the cap in its entirety, the liability, or have some kind of multiplier, X fees paid for data security issues. And in the context of AI, I think the risks are unknown to some extent and can be incredibly high.
Want more Insight Jam? Follow us on Instagram for exclusive content like a daily dose of best practices and buying advice from industry experts and leading solution providers. Or subscribe to our YouTube channel for long-form highlights from our expert panel discussions. The Solutions Review team is hard at work collecting the best enterprise technology information from around the globe, so don't miss out.
Wow, I mean, these are all these legal aspects that I never even, some of which I've never even thought of. So this is great. This is very valuable for me too. So, I've heard the term golden handcuffs in the context of on-prem systems like an SAP ECC or an Infor LN or something like that, going to a cloud model. So you're going from like a capital expenditure to an operational expenditure. And to what extent are they really real handcuffs? I mean, is there a way they can keep you in the fold if you, other than making it more difficult to get, say, your data out if you want to switch to another ERP vendor? Are there any restrictions that you see where actually real handcuffs, not golden handcuffs, to keep them from switching?
Switching from another ERP system, or switching?
Yeah, like a vendor lock-in type situation.
Yeah, I mean, there's a variety of things that they can do. I mean, I think it depends on, are they forcing a migration, for example, from on-prem to cloud? And we all hear about SAP's deadline and these kinds of things. And the reality is that when you have an on-prem solution, you almost always have a perpetual license to utilize that software. Okay, but that doesn't get you very much when they're sunsetting support, they're not providing upgrades, updates, and that software now then becomes obsolete. And I mean, it's not really that much different than what Apple does with the iPhone, right? I mean, my youngest child has an old iPad that we let her use to watch YouTube Kids, and she can't actually download certain versions of YouTube anymore because it's not compatible with the operating system. And I think a lot of vendors do that very same thing, and they do it on purpose. And it's really to get you to transition from their legacy on-prem solutions to their cloud solutions. And so, I mean, there's a practical aspect of this and there's a legal aspect, right? I mean, do you have the ability to utilize that software perpetually? Sure. But are they going to do everything they can to make it difficult for you to do that? Absolutely. Because they want to drive revenue. Are they going to make it difficult for you not only to transition or not transition to their cloud product, but make it difficult for you to transition to a new ERP vendor? Absolutely, they're going to do that, right? I mean, they may say, yeah, you can do it at any time. They may even give you, some sort of a termination right that I would call it a termination for convenience. Let's say you've got a 5-year term, but you no longer really want to utilize the software because it doesn't meet your needs. So you want to move over to a new system. Not only are they going to make it difficult to terminate in general, but there's going to be some sort of acceleration provision where you're going to have to pay all the fees that you would have paid as if you would have utilized that software for the full duration of the term, right? So you terminate in year 3, but you have a 6-year term. Well, too bad, so sad for you, because now you've got to pay all the money that you would have paid under that term, and then they make it difficult for you to get the data out anyway. So yeah.
So that switch to the OpEx kind of model is they're making that. Well, actually, they're probably more making it difficult to stay.
Yeah, I think so.
I would
Yeah.
say, right.
Yeah.
If you have, just to take the case of SAP, the EHP, whatever it is, ECC to, there's 2 deadlines actually. There's one next year, which is a version upgrade within ECC to get you to the level where you can convert over to S/4HANA. So I imagine they will make that one very difficult by saying, oh, you don't get your support anymore, and we're not going to give you extended support,
right?
Which I think is the case with the first one, the 2025 one. 2027, I think they'll give you extended support, but you got to pay a lot, to get that support. But I think it's not actually handcuffs, but it is creating a situation where it makes it very difficult to stay.
Yeah, I mean, for all intents and purposes, it really is handcuffs, right? I mean, they're handcuffing your ability to utilize that software in the way that you contractually you thought you had a right to, which was this perpetual ability, because they make it not feasible anymore for you. There's all these hoops that you've got to jump through if you want to stay on that software system or the version of it. You're an SAP shop, right? So you want to stay in SAP shop because your employees know how to utilize that software, and there shouldn't be, in theory, some huge delta between the functionality in your on-prem legacy system and the newest version of SAP. It's all SAP.
Right.
Whether that's true or not, it's debatable. So you already have an incentive to stay on that, and they want to keep that incentive there for you, because they're going to make it very difficult for you to transition over to NetSuite or Oracle or Infor, whatever it is. And so, yeah, so I think the concept of golden handcuffs is a good one to use in this.
So I'm curious about that. When you're making that transition, let's assume the handcuffs are real, and you make that transition. When you're transferring from the different models, the CapEx to the OpEx and the SaaS model versus the on-prem, are there any kind of must-haves that a customer? So I just want to, kind of explore what are the must-haves that you would have in a contract, if any.
Yeah, I mean, there really are a variety of must-haves, and it depends on what kind of business you're in, what your relationship with that vendor is, and what you need as a customer. So it can be fact dependent, but I think it's fair to say that everyone entering into a SaaS or cloud-based agreement, really, you've got to have the ability to get out of that agreement in an efficient, economical way. And so, you can't get locked into it. So what that means is you've got to have some termination right, whether that's termination for breach or material breach by the vendor. You've got to have some ability to get out of that contract if, for example, the nature of the functionality changes in a material way. So you sign up for product A under the assumption that it's going to do certain things, or under a contractual obligation that's going to do certain things. That functionality has changed over time, and now the functionality is actually decreased. There needs to be an ability to deal with that. And if you need to terminate the contract for that, then that's what should happen, right? They make it very difficult to get out of these contracts just in general. I mean, not even from a practical standpoint. A lot of people don't have attorneys review these contracts. They get into them and they want to terminate it. Well, they don't have a termination right. You can't actually get out of the contract until the term is over, which is just ridiculous.
Wow. I would think they would need somebody by your side. I mean, you by their side, even when you're in a sort of a phase 0, right? To make sure that phase 0 of a digital transformation project, let's say, that they have you by their side for some legal representation, so they don't get into any bad contracts.
Yeah, well, there's an old saying in our business: early legal advice is not expensive, and it's the later legal advice that becomes incredibly expensive. You know what As far as other things that I think are must-haves, you want to, let's stick with this functionality concept. You want to have a representation and a warranty in the agreement that the level of functionality is not going to decrease over time. So what I'm getting is going to be consistent. That's never going to be materially affected by upgrades, updates, modifications, or changes that the vendor makes with software. You're going to want to have the ability to swap out unused seats or software or whatever it is. So, if so you don't want to have shelfware, right? If you over bought, you want to be able to swap that out, utilize it in some way. One of the other things that we see happen is there will be changes to the functionality or the products in name only. And so, we've bought a bucket of software in our contract, and now the vendor changes the name or changes it insignificantly, and it's now something different, and they want to charge us a new fee for that. And so you want to make sure that doesn't happen. Okay. Transition assistance, we talked about, that's incredibly important. We talked about termination rights. But then I think, going from an on-prem to a cloud solution, service level obligations and service level agreement is incredibly important. You want to know, how often is that software going to be guaranteed to be accessible to me? And how do we define
like an uptime guarantee?
Right.
Yeah.
How do you define uptime, and what happens when it's not actually accessible or available to me? Meaning,
right.
I
would think support would play a role in that.
Exactly.
Too. You have first and second level support, I guess, would also be in that kind of a contract. And
you hit the nail on the head. It really would be. And so, those are, off the top of my head, those are the things that I think are come to the forefront. I mean, there's a variety of different issues that you've got to address, from limitations of liability, representations and warranties, data security, all of these things. You can really get into the nuances of it. But, from a big picture perspective, I think, price caps, swap rights, termination assistance, the ability to terminate, and then uptime guarantees all become important when you're making that change.
Definitely. So I'm wondering whether you've seen any kind of troubling or gotcha type trends in contracts lately. So they might be related to cloud or maybe not. Contracts from vendors.
Yeah.
ERP vendors.
One of the main things that we're seeing right now is a transition from transparency to just this level of opaqueness that I've never seen before. And what I mean by that is, you'll have a company like Oracle or SAP give you what looks like an order form, and it may be 3 pages, 4 pages, relatively simple, relatively easy to understand. But the gotcha in there is that there's going to be a page either buried in the back or maybe up in front. In Oracle's case, there are allegations that they hide these links in there, but there's going to be a reference to URLs that are outside the 4 corners of that agreement that are arguably incorporated by reference. But the challenge that you've got is it's really twofold. One, the 3-page document that you think you have that's really easy to understand now incorporates by reference documents that are located on the internet at Oracle's URLs, just by way of example, that are 10, 15, 20 pages each, and there's 10 different references, right? So this 3-page contract is now 150 pages long, and it's incredibly complicated with terms and conditions that are buried. There's a case winding through the courts now where Oracle's actually been accused of doing just that, and that's hiding URLs into its agreement, making it impossible for the customer to not only agree to the contract, but even find the terms that are applicable to that relationship. And so we'll see how the court rules on that. But I think it's an interesting novel issue, because we've been doing this for quite a long time, but it's gotten, I think, more deceptive and a little bit more problematic in most recently here in the last 3 to 5 years, I would say. We also see an inability for these vendors to move on unreasonable caps on their limitation of liability. So what they'll propose is a cap on their liability that's equal to the amount of fees that you've paid for a subset of the total products set or services set, in the last 6 months.
There's
right?
so many things to think about from a legal standpoint.
Oh, it's crazy. It's crazy, right? So, the most amount of money you can recover if you were to sue that vendor is the amount of money that you've spent on the software in the last 6 months, right? And so maybe you didn't actually spend any money in the last 6 months on the software, only on services or only on support on an ongoing basis or maintenance or whatever. And so they'll come back with a calculation that says, well, our limit on your ability to get money from us is capped at 0 because you haven't spent any money in the last 6 months or something crazy like that. And they'll be it'll be very difficult to negotiate them off of that position. Which is another trend, just difficulty in negotiating with the vendors in general. They try to assert that, hey, this is a cloud offering and it's a consistent offering across our entire customer base, so we don't have the ability to change these terms, which is absolutely ridiculous. The terms...
Oh, wow, that's a little trick.
It is ridiculous. The legal terms and conditions are not really tied to the functionality so much, at least not in the way that they present it. And, there's nothing about the fact that you offer this software product to your entire customer base that means you can't deviate from your standard limitation of liability provision or whatever it is. We also will see, massive price increases at the end of certain terms or at the end of each term that need those need to be capped and negotiated pretty carefully because that's problematic. And then the last
salespeople got to meet their quarterly targets.
That's absolutely
true.
Get
big right? Price increase on October the 2nd.
Yeah, every year.
Yeah, every year.
Yeah.
That's good stuff.
We see cloud solutions that are half baked on a pretty consistent basis where the functionality is lacking or doesn't exist. And then really the other trend we see is just this wholesale incorporation of artificial intelligence as a means to push the products, and that really not being fully baked either. But then with that comes all these data security issues that it's really kind of a minefield of legal issues that you've got to navigate, and hardline positions on what they can do with your data, who owns the data, how it can be utilized, and all that is nuanced and challenging and needs to be negotiated.
Solutions Review is inviting you to join InsightJam.com. What started a few years ago as a social media event to celebrate enterprise technology has now grown into an always-on tech community with live events, discussions, videos, vendor showcases, and industry resources. Our vetted roster of experts, thought leaders, and analysts are sharing tips and tricks daily. So if you're interested in getting involved, join the long list of companies and brands who have already participated by visiting InsightJam.com today.
So let me put you on the spot here and ask you, without naming any names, what is the biggest, nastiest ERP failure you've ever litigated? Without naming any names, don't want to put anybody on the spot. In your recently, let's say recently, not in your career.
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a few of them, and I think the biggest one that may not be the sexiest really, but is certainly the one that had the most impact on my client. I represented a national supplier of pet products. Okay, and they had entered into an agreement with a European-based software provider that signed them up to kind of like a beta program or a first adopter program for this functionality. And that functionality, it was all cloud-based. That functionality was really not ready for prime time at all. And the results when they went live were absolutely devastating. And so what ended up happening was they flipped the switch. They transitioned over to the new software. Customers in this industry, buy in bulk, and they want to just have kind of a mix. Like, let's say they're buying pet collars, right? They want to be able to buy a certain amount, at a time, and in a variety of sizes and colors. And the software would only allow them to buy one at a time in one size, and they had to do it, 50 or 100 times. That's just problematic, right? But the real problem though was that the software was over authorizing credit cards. And so you would buy $500 worth of product, but it would authorize your card for the limit, the maximum limit that you had. So if you have a $50,000 limit on your card, you're buying $500 worth of product, it pre-authorizes it for $100K or $50K, whatever the number is. And now your car's locked and you can't use it. So that ended up resulting in a massive amount of customer complaints going into the customer, the client, and then the police getting involved and the FBI getting involved.
Oh, wow.
Or asserting that there was credit card fraud. This company actually had to hire a call center to be able to take all the complaints because it was crippling.
Oh my God.
And ultimately,
it's a disaster.
It was a massive disaster. I mean, it really just impacted their business so badly that they ended up actually going out of business. They had to sell the company to another third party to be able to get out of it. And so that probably was the worst one. Again, not the sexiest, but just that's the way they happen, and people need to really understand that when you're picking software, picking an integrator, embarking on a digital transformation, I mean, this is no joke, right? I mean, you get it wrong, and the consequences could be dramatic and severe, and that is not a good thing to have happen to you. We've seen recently, we were representing a national bank, and they had engaged another European software vendor to provide software that would help them meet their banking requirements and regulatory requirements in the United States. And one of the side benefits of the pandemic is so many of these sales meetings were recorded on Zoom and done remotely that from an evidentiary standpoint, what we've always thought happens in these meetings, actually we see it happening where they will say,
Oh, wow.
Don't worry about it. All the functionality I'm showing you is actually real. It exists today. If you sign the contract today, this is what you're going to get. And it just wasn't true. I mean, it hadn't been fully developed, kind of worked, kind of didn't. It was still in development. I wouldn't say it was vaporware, but just about vaporware. And then, they get into the middle of the implementation and they can't meet the regulatory requirements. Things aren't working. The workarounds are for, if somebody actually comes into the bank and wants to open up an account, they can't actually do it through a teller. The teller is going to hand them an iPad. They can do it on a self-service basis while sitting in the bank. It's just things that just don't make any sense, right? Vaporware, fraud, those are the things that we do see, not every time, but when they do happen, that has a massive impact.
Right. Yeah. Because usually you hear about operational disruption, right? So some sort of scenario like Hershey's, for example, where they couldn't ship any product for X number of weeks or whatever and lost a lot of market share as a result, things like that. You hear about those sorts of things. But that's interesting to hear that it could be things like fraud or vaporware or some sort of thing that the vendor promised that they didn't deliver. That's an interesting angle to it.
We see that.
Very good. So does it, just quick corollary to that, do you end up with the system integrators? It suits against the system integrators rather than the vendor, or it's both at one time, or, get as much money as you can, or to multiple throats to choke, they say, right?
Yeah. And that's actually a really good question. And we see everything. I think when you engage multiple vendors, you've got your software vendor, you've got your integrator, maybe you've got subcontractors on there as well. You've got, best of breed solutions that are coming in to supplement the ERP vendor. That becomes incredibly messy from a legal perspective because everybody points the finger at everybody else. And you've got to untangle that as the lawyer and find out what the root cause of the failure really was and who's more responsible than not. And sometimes it's just difficult to do that. And you end up suing as many people as you can that seem like they were responsible for the failure. But, our preference, and it's not always practical from a business perspective, is to, have one throat to choke so that it becomes clean and easy and it streamlines the litigation process if you've got to litigate it. But I think even from a management standpoint, in the real world, that probably is more desirable, I would think, in some scenarios. Why have 5 vendors that you're trying to manage when you can have essentially one vendor that you can look to and hold accountable for everything that goes wrong if it does go wrong?
Well, I learned a lot, Marcus. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate the opportunity, Dan. It's always good to talk to you. Always insightful. I enjoy the content that you put out and always learn something from that as well. So
Thank you.
It's an honor and a pleasure to be on your show here.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I will say that was absolutely fascinating to listen to. And I get the feeling, Marcus, that there are a lot more stories that you could tell, or maybe some that you can't tell, at least at this point.
There are a lot of both of those, and even more that I don't really want to be able to tell, but that, they're so dramatic, and you'd be surprised. Like I said, we've been doing this for a long time, and we've seen about every trick that these vendors pull. And some of these are truly, disasters, and really have impactful, results on, small to medium-sized businesses that are really stretching to implement some of these solutions. And when they go sideways, they really go sideways.
Yeah, you should make a movie, Marcus. You should make a movie about this. Or
there might be something there, a la The Big Short or something like that. Right? Yeah. Keep the notes. There could be a future in that down the line.
Firm. You could do the Firm, a reboot.
ERP version, right?
ERP version.
Firm for HANA or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh wow, yeah. So, Marcus, if people did want to learn more about what you do, maybe get a few more of those stories, where should they go and look? Where should they find you?
Yeah, you can find me online pretty easily. I've got a YouTube channel, Marcus Harris, software and tech attorney. You can check out the videos there that really kind of expand on a lot of the topics that we talked about here. You can find me at Instagram, Marcus Harris, LinkedIn as well. Easy to find there. And then if you've got specific questions, feel free to reach out to me. taftlaw.com is my website, and you can find me there pretty easily.
Absolutely. And all those links will be right down there in the description if you want to just click away. Dan, anywhere that people should be looking for you? Any new articles or anything like that?
Yeah, so LinkedIn as well. Our LinkedIn is PCG. You can go to PCG's LinkedIn page. We're building up the membership there. The website is pcgservices.com. And we have one more website, which is called asmartfactory.com. So that's our smart factory, whole ID and everything about how our smart factory works.
Excellent. So yeah, check those out. And you know what? While you're down there perusing the description, go ahead, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, so that you can get informed when the next episode of Evolving ERP and all of our great content here on the Insight Jam YouTube channel. And you know what? While you're down there, also you can click on the link to take you to insightjam.com. If you are interested in enterprise software, ERP, AI, anything like that, join insightjam.com and you can get involved and talk to experts in that field. And big changes coming to the site, and we have our big end of year panel days. A whole week of enterprise resource planning content and enterprise technology content coming in December. Be sure to check that out so that you don't miss it. So for Dan Aldridge and Marcus Harris, thanks again for being on the show. I've been Ryan Daly, and we'll see you next time on Evolving ERP. Thanks a lot.
Ryan.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.